BMW's X5 is one of the best luxury SUVs you can buy in America, and it's long been my top pick in the mid-sized two-row segment because it's so well balanced. And I'm not talking about the 50-50 weight balance, which is of course perfect. I'm talking about the blend of features, gadgets, gizmos, and performance that you get in an X5. More luxury than a Maserati SUV, more gadgets than a Tesla SUV, and performance pretty darn similar to a Porsche Cayenne SUV for a little bit less money. Now, bear in mind, this X5M comes in at $145,000, which is why in this video, we're also going to be talking about the more affordable versions of the X5. For this model year, every X5 gets a pretty significant refresh. On the inside, we get the latest curved iDrive display, we get some new engines under the hood, and we get some exterior changes as well. But none of these changes are as, shall we say, controversial as some of BMW's latest designs. For instance, the grille, it's pretty demure, even in this BMW X5M competition, which is quite a long name. The grille is rimmed in black, which definitely helps it blend in a little bit better with the darker colors. We get these full LED headlights here with the chevron sort of theme there for the accent lights. No fog lights below, of course, because we need all of this extra room for cooling the big 4.4-liter V8 under the hood. Since this is a refresh, not a redesign, the form factor and the size of the X5 remains the same. This is a 2-row or a 3-row SUV depending on the option box as you check, although I would recommend getting the X7 if you really want a 3-row BMW. The back end is boxier and the third row is roomier thanks to the extra length in the X7. We of course get different wheels and tires depending on the trims you're looking at, with in this trim some really massive tires. These are Michelin Pilot Sport 4S tires, 295 width tires up front, 315s in the rear. The rims are of course 21s because we have absolutely massive M-branded calipers in there with cross-drilled rotors in this model. And that's not just up front, we have some pretty meaty rotors and calipers back here in the rear too. Practicality has long been a virtue of the X5. Even though this is primarily a 2-row vehicle, because we have that optional third row, we have a roofline that is much more horizontal and a hatch that is much more vertical than a lot of the sporty 2-rows. And that means much greater cargo practicality in the back. This also is one of the few SUVs to retain this tailgate functionality, which I think is fantastic. Some of you might be wondering, why would I want my SUV to have this kind of feature? Isn't it just something extra to brake? Well, I mean, yes, probably, but it's also really handy. If you like tailgating, you can do that in your SUV because your legs are not bumping on the bumper, getting all dirty after you've gone wherever you have in the mud. It also is powered, making it an awful lot more convenient, and if you grocery shop like pretty much everybody does, and you have things rolling around in the cargo area, this prevents them from falling out. That's probably the biggest reason that I love this design. It also means that the hatch can be a little bit smaller, so it's a little bit quicker than some to open, but the bigger benefit is that it doesn't go quite as far back because it doesn't have to be quite as long. Also, it can be a little bit higher. You'll notice that the edge of this doesn't really start till right about here, so taller folks are probably less likely to bump their heads on it, especially if this is down so that way they can get in, because you'll notice this is pretty vertical right here. They're pretty much in line with one another. With the hatch closed, you can see the subtly redesigned exterior. The taillights have sort of a semi-chevron theme that mirrors what was going on in the headlights. Full LEDs, of course, and in this trim, quad exhaust tips with that distinctive lower bumper treatment there. Every X5 sold in North America is now going to be at least a mild hybrid, and some of the trims get a decent power bump. Starting with the base 40i trim, it still uses a 3-liter inline-6 turbo engine, producing 375 horsepower, 383 pound-feet of torque. That's a noticeable bump over last year, but it also gets a 12 horsepower electric motor tossed into the mix. It's a 48-volt mild hybrid system. That electric motor is positioned between the engine and the 8-speed automatic, and it adds 147 pound-feet of torque to the mix. Now, the peak torque of the engine and the electric motor don't occur at the same time, but there is a little bit of overlap, so the total peak torque does rise a little bit over 383 when everything is working together. If you want a V8, there's still two available. In the M60i, it's been renamed from the M50i, we get a 4.4-liter twin-turbo V8, similar to this engine right here, producing 523 horsepower, 553 pound-feet of torque. Of course, if you want the whole hog, you want the M5 competition, which uses a version of that 4.4-liter V8 tuned all the way up to 617 horsepower, and still again, that 12 horsepower electric motor to the mix. So a little bit more torque at low-end speeds. It also enables a smoother auto start-stop system. BMW says that the X5M competition is not going to be any quicker 0 to 60 than the outgoing model, although in my testing it actually was just 1/10 of a second faster. This 8-speed automatic transmission includes new ratios, better cooling, and the interesting thing about this mild hybrid system is that they now route the electric motor through a reduction gear ratio of its own rather than simply being directly connected to the transmission. They say that actually gives you more effective torque right at the bell housing of the transmission. If you'd rather plug in, the plug-in hybrid is still available. It's also been renamed from the 45E to the 50E because we get a bigger battery with more oomph and a bigger electric motor. That bumps power all the way up to 483 horsepower. It uses essentially the same 3-liter turbo that we find in the base model, tuned on the Miller cycle, and everything together will give you 40 miles plus of EV range and 22 miles per gallon combined. Another big change is that it's going to charge faster, something I complained about the last time I drove the X5 plug-in hybrid. It was nearly perfect, but the charging speed was a bit of a bummer. They've now bumped that up to 7.4 kilowatts, so you should be able to charge that battery in maybe about 3 to 4 hours, depending on the kind of power you have available. Whether you're looking at the base X5 or this top-end competition trim at nearly $150,000, I find the front seats in all of them to be very comfortable for my body shape. I just like the way that BMW's seat cushions are designed. I find them very supportive for my back and for my legs as well. We of course have an extending powered thigh cushion in this model, adjustable seat back curvature in this sport seat as well, 4-way adjustable lumbar support, and front seat massage. Although I should mention that BMW's front seat massage is not as aggressive, not as massagey as Volvo's or Mercedes front seat massage. But if we're talking about this X5M competition, clearly there's no Volvo competition there, and these seats I find significantly more comfortable than the top-end sport seats that we find in the Mercedes. I just find that those hit me in some awkward pressure points, and these are the kind of seats I would want to spend hours and hours in. So even though this is the sporty version, this is definitely long road trip capable. Jumping into the back, we definitely find more legroom back here than you'll find in an X3. That's a solid reason, of course, to get the regular X5 over the X3. With this front seat comfortably adjusted for me at 6 feet tall, I have about 4 inches of legroom left. That does mean that if you plan on putting bulkier, convertible rear-facing child seats back here, roominess could be a bit of an issue with taller folks up front. Although I will mention that effective legroom in the rear does change a little bit based on the front seat design. If you get the base models, you'll actually get just a skosh more real-world room. With these larger sport seats, that's the nature and the design of the seat, which I'll show you in a bit, does cause a little bit of an effective legroom problem. Thanks to the X5's tall roofline, likely because of that optional third row, second row passengers have lots of headroom and a pretty horizontal ceiling there. And as you can see, definitely enough room for some of the larger child seats like this rear-facing infant seat. You can see that there's just barely enough room behind these sport seats for a 6-foot-tall person to be up front, and that seat very comfortably to be in the rear. We also have a fairly flat floor, so if you did want to put some of these base stations with the load leg here in the middle, you could probably do that comfortably. Also, a middle passenger is not going to be inconvenienced by a large hump there in the back. Then we have that cargo area. Not only do we have the really handy hatch and tailgate format, we also have a really square, boxy cargo area. You can see that the walls are very, very vertical, and that allowed me to squeeze 4 24-inch roller bags back here and just barely one 22-inch roller bag as well. This is a really, really large and accommodating cargo area. Under the load floor, we have something of a unicorn. Heavens be praised, it's the 21st century. We have 600 horsepower and a spare tire in a performance vehicle. Now, admittedly, it is a donut, but I would much rather have a donut than a can of Fix-A-Flat. As you'd expect out of a top-end trim, the headliner and the sun visors are all upholstered in this imitation suede fabric. The sun visors do extend. We have the controls for the sunroof right over here, and it's a dual-pane sunroof. The front pane opens, the rear pane does not. I would normally be showing you the sky through the sunroof, but we have something unusual with this sunroof, and that is we actually have ambient lighting as part of the sunroof design. It's pretty difficult to film during the day, so I've tossed a towel on the outside. So what you're seeing here is a reflection and the dark towel there. But we have an LED array all the way around the glass, and then we have these sort of etchings right there inside the glass that allow you to actually see the pattern being formed in both the front pane and the back pane of glass. For me at least, this is a really cool touch, and it's a reason to leave the shade open at night. We also have a slightly different pattern to those dots on the front pane and the back pane. You can see it actually has a bit of a curve or a squiggle there. On the rear doors, you can see the sunshades for the rear passengers there. the ceiling speakers on this Bowers & Wilkins audio system, and the only thing that I've always thought was unusual about the X5 interior, which is that we don't have height-adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and front passenger. We do, however, have these very, very sporty M seats in this model, obviously the X5M logo right there, and of course perforated center sections to the leather here, really big shoulder bolsters and side bolsters, but fortunately these are wide enough that these seats don't feel constrictive to me, and I had some larger people than I am sit in these seats, and actually they found them pretty comfortable too, so that definitely bodes well. Pretty aggressive bottom bolsters there on the bottom part of the seat, and again that extending thigh cushion. As you'd expect out of an SUV with a price tag that stretches well over $100,000, we have lots of premium materials in here. Full leather coverings on the doors all the way top to bottom, side to side. Everything there is stitched leather, so down there at the bottom of the door you can see those stitches. And then we find seat matching upholstery sections right there in the middle, so that honeycomb theme that mirrors what's going on down there on the driver and front passenger seats. It's a really nicely done interior. We also find metal speaker grills and of course ambient lighting there as well. Moving over to the dashboard, same sort of thing going on, ambient lighting here in the dash. Obviously a little bit different depending on the X5 trim you get, since we're in the M. We find that one right there. You can adjust the color. This one is currently set to purple. Carbon fiber trim above that, and then leather above and leather below. So the entire lower portion of the dash is all made from leather. We then find a reasonably sized bin style glove compartment. There's a little bit of a slot behind it, but not too much. I was barely able to fit an 11-inch tablet computer inside. In the middle of the dash, we have that Bowers & Wilkins center channel speaker, and then we have perhaps the biggest change for this interior, which is this big 2-screen iDrive setup. 2 big screens in one curved housing gives this the illusion of one big screen that spans the dashboard, but you can see there's actually a blank section between the 2 screens. This one is, of course, a touch screen right here in the middle. It supports smartphone integration wirelessly, and they've reserved a tiny portion of the screen for system functions. So home button there, climate buttons down there at the bottom, and then you just hit that one right there if you want to go all the way over to the other climate controls. This is again running the latest BMW iDrive 8 system with all of the integrated apps right there. If you want to know more about this, I have a separate video. This is very fully featured. Some people might find the interface a little bit convoluted, but I love the functionality of iDrive, and I love the fact that we have a full touchscreen here, something that not every luxury car manufacturer has moved back to, but thankfully most have. Below that, we find 2 big air vents, a few controls for the system, so this is power and volume over here, track forward, backward, and then we have some dedicated buttons for the defroster and defogger for the climate control system. Down here, we have a Qi wireless charging mat, definitely large enough for some of those larger smartphones. I have a iPhone Max in there, 1 USB cord port there, but it won't do CarPlay. It is wireless only, so you don't get to choose wired or wireless. We have a cover over this little area, so you pull it down there and you can cover that whole area off. Although this glossy carbon fiber is probably going to show scratches just a little bit sooner than I would like. I think that's one reason that we see so many luxury car companies moving to more of an open pore wood theme. Seems to show scratches a little bit less. Moving back here, we find the unique M shifter. Here's what's going on. It's a joystick style shifter. Put your foot on the brake, pull it over for neutral, over and forward for reverse, over to that side for drive or sport. Park is that button here, and then we use this little toggle to adjust the shift nature of the transmission. If you want the shifts more aggressive or less aggressive, basically smoother or quicker, that's basically your choice. Then over here we have the rotary controller for the iDrive system. You can still use this if you'd rather, and then we have touch buttons for some of the system functions in the shadows here. It's a little bit difficult to show you. Over here we find buttons for the stability and traction control, parking sense, drive mode buttons, basically the M mode button. Once you've hit the M mode button, you adjust the M mode up here, whether you want track, you can activate track right there, or we can go back to sport, or you have the normal mode. That's going to affect the way the instrument cluster behaves. There's also an important setup button, a button to make the exhaust louder, and then auto brake hold. The setup button takes you to this screen on the infotainment system where you can adjust a wide variety of different vehicle settings, and you can also configure the way the M buttons on the steering wheel work and exactly what they do. So for instance, right now I have M1 set to the sportiest engine and transmission, but the softest suspension, sportiest steering, and sportiest brakes, because who wants brakes that are not sporty? Start stop off and the M sound on with all the nannies available. But if I wanted to take things to the next level and I wanted to turn off the nannies, I could do that here. So I could put this one on the off mode, and then that allows me to put the four-wheel drive system in the sport mode right there, and of course I can somehow combine that with M sound being fairly demure. Before I forget, let's get back to the center console. That's where we find a storage area with one of these bifold doors and a single USB-C charge port. Up here we find a full color LCD heads-up display. It's housed in this binnacle right up there, just above the full LCD instrument cluster. Then we have BMW's attractive LCD instrument cluster. It's not quite as configurable as some, but I love the fact that this is one of the few displays that gives you two-screen Apple CarPlay. This nav system layout is actually being driven by my connected smartphone. So if, for instance, I just popped in a random destination into that nav system on my phone, you'll see it's actually going to look just like Apple's iPhone guidance. So it's going to show you not just turn-by-turn navigation directions in the heads-up display, it's actually going to show you that moving map display right in there. The steering wheel is classic BMW, nice and thickly rimmed with sport grips up top, 3 spokes, and big paddle shifters that move with the steering wheel. You can see also we find the M1 and M2 buttons up there, controls for the adaptive cruise control over here on this side, and some infotainment and LCD and heads-up display controls over here on this side. Now, the one thing I did find a little bit odd about this refresh of X5, I didn't notice this last time, is that we have kind of an odd little cover over here over the steering wheel. That allows the steering wheel to move up and down and telescope. But I really think that could have been done a little bit more elegantly. I mean, there's so much leather in this interior. This just seems a little bit odd, especially if you play with it, obviously. Most people probably aren't. But I do think it also looks just a little bit odd from the passenger perspective and just not quite as expensive as all of the leather and the stitching and everything else that's going on all around it. Before we move on, everyone wants to know about the air vents. That's what they look like when they're in motion, and then this little knob rotates around to open and close the vent. As you'd expect, 0 to 60 performance is absolutely fantastic, and indeed slightly better than BMW let on. I recorded 0 to 60 times back-to-back in this model in 3.6 seconds, and the road was just mildly moist, what I would say. It had rained about 2 days before, been cloudy ever since, so the road surface was not perfectly dry. And that makes the braking score even more impressive. At 109 feet from 60 miles an hour back to 0, this is a big, heavy SUV that practically stops on a dime. Oddly enough, you won't give up much in terms of 0 to 60 and braking performance, moving from something like an M3 up to this enormous X5M competition. Now, logically, you will give up something in terms of handling, but handling here is absolutely fantastic thanks to the wide, grippy tires, and the tires themselves, because they are Michelin Pilot Sport 4S's, of course. Even though it is a little bit on the cool side right now, apparently it's 45 degrees outside, these tires have an awful lot of grip, really a surprising amount of grip. They are, however, going to give up a little bit earlier in these colder temperatures than they would in the warm, and logically this is going to give up grip faster than something like an M3. There's just a penalty to be paid for the amount of weight and the center of gravity in the X5M. It's not going to be able to dance like an M3, but oddly enough, I think this does pretty well compared against some of the other large performance sedans that you might be cross-shopping against, or if you are considering something like a performance EV and you're really on the fence, EV or this is a different kind of fun, but I would say it really honestly matches a lot of those high-performance EVs when it comes to the actual fun factor. Just the raucous sound from this engine is absolutely fantastic, regardless of the mode you're in. Opening those exhaust pipes just sounds absolutely great. As far as the handling score goes, most versions of the X5 are going to score an A- to an A. Obviously, this one's going to get an A. Why not an A+? Well, that's reserved for the more performance-focused entries, and I would describe something like the Porsche Cayenne in its top-end models, one of those performance-focused trims. Remember what I said at the beginning of the video. What I love about the X5 and the X5M included is that this is such a well-balanced SUV. It's not ultra focused on handling ability. There are certainly going to be vehicles in this segment that are going to be a little bit more fun, they're going to road hold a little bit better. That was not necessarily the mission of the X5. The mission of this vehicle is to give you that track-capable performance, that incredible handling performance, but also be daily driver livable, be the kind of vehicle you could drive to work in on a long winding mountain road, even a poorly paved road like we're on here. Yes, this poorly paved road is not going to be as comfortable as it would be in the plug-in hybrid version of the X5, but you could still do it if you were after something sportier. And by the time you've worked your way up to some of the ultra high performance SUVs, certainly a Lamborghini Urus or something along those lines, it's an awful lot more difficult to live with that kind of ride quality every day, and I just wouldn't want to commute in that kind of car. Now's a good time to talk about some of the available vehicle settings. Even in the regular stability control mode, this gets pretty tail happy, and that's because it is going to send the majority of power to the rear axle unless it's needed up front. That's partially to help the vehicle from exhibiting torque steer, which you can definitely get if it sent more power to the front axle, and partially because that was simply a desired characteristic of the vehicle. They wanted this to have all-wheel traction, really quick 0 to 60 times, but still have that strong rear power bias. If you put it in the sport mode, it's going to send even more power to the back, and of course it's going to disable or turn off the traction and stability control system depending on exactly which mode you have the vehicle in. In those modes, this gets very, very lively, and remember, we have a lot of horsepower and a lot of torque at very low RPM, so those are the modes where you do have to exercise an awful lot of caution with your right foot. Also, this automatic transmission has very rapid shifts. It is a traditional 8-speed automatic transmission. It's not a dual clutch or anything like that, but sometimes you might actually think that it is a dual clutch because it has a very aggressive torque converter lockup and it has very, very sharp gear changes. And you will certainly notice that from a stop where tiny bit of turbo lag, all the power, and then really, really abrupt shifts into second and into third. Depending on the road surface, if it's just less than perfect, you'll actually get just a tiny bit of wheel slip as this vehicle pops into second gear. Also, in these aggressive shift and aggressive transition modes, it's going to hold the gear ratios a lot longer. So if you don't like that particular feeling, you can dial exactly how much of that you want up and down. If I put this in the 3-bar mode, with that little toggle there on the shifter, it shows on the display there, then it's really going to hold those low gear ratios for a really long time. It's really going to prevent it upshifting if at all possible. But whichever trim you're looking at and whichever competitive set you're comparing that model to, I honestly give all versions of the X5 an A+ when it comes to ride quality, and I am especially impressed again with this X5M competition because speed bumps, potholes, freeway expansion joints, etc., they don't upset the cabin as much as you'd expect. Again, still firmer than the normal one, but not punishing. And if you want to take things to the next level, you can just engage one of these M mode buttons and dial it all the way up. Back out on the paved road at 50 miles an hour, I measured 69 decibels in here, making this pretty similar to the rest of the X5 lineup when it comes to cabin noise. Now, I will say that one thing with the X5 is that if you're on a rougher road surface, the wider tires are going to make the cabin a little bit louder than the regular models, because most of what we're hearing in here is road noise coming through the chassis, coming through the tires in the vehicle, and that's just to be expected for a performance car, especially a performance car with the tires that we have on this model. Fuel economy, also set your expectations appropriately. We've been averaging 14.1 miles per gallon. I had actually expected this to be worse because it's only EPA rated for 15 miles per gallon. Yes, it is a mild hybrid, but no, it's not exactly a efficiency-focused mild hybrid. BMW is putting mild hybrids and plug-in hybrid systems on their vehicles because they want the performance ability of those systems and the fact that they can help reduce consumption, help reduce emissions, and allow us to still have insane V8 powered vehicles like this. The ultimate expression of this philosophy is the BMW XM, but I don't know if it's the best expression of this philosophy because if you watch my video on the XM, I'm actually not the biggest fan of that vehicle. It's a little bit less efficient than I had expected, and it is actually slower than this X5M competition 0 to 60. That's because of the added weight of that battery pack and some of the other design choices that BMW made with that model. Now, it recently got a bit more power, and I haven't been able to test it. It could finally match this in terms of 0 to 60 acceleration times, but it's not going to beat it in any sort of appreciable way, just due to the extra weight of that plug-in hybrid setup. It is, of course, going to give you plug-in hybrid range, and it is going to give you realistically better fuel economy than this model, but the difference is not going to be enormous. And if you're really interested in the purity of handling ability, etc., you're going to want the X5M competition because of its lighter weight construction. What's most impressive about the X5 is how well-rounded it is. It's comfortable, it's quiet, it's wicked fast, there's a plug-in hybrid model if you want something that's efficient, and of course there's the absolutely bonkers M competition version. There's just an incredible range of X5 to choose from, if you will. So with that in mind, let's talk about what you get in the various different versions. $66,195 gets you the base 3-liter inline-6 engine. I would say that's a solid competitor to the Mercedes-Benz GLE, the Cayenne, perhaps a Macan upgrade for the same price. You definitely get a bigger, roomier cabin for about the same price as a comparably equipped small Porsche crossover, and certainly a solid upgrade from something like a Honda or a Jeep or something in that mainstream category if you're looking for something a bit more luxurious, a bit more performance-oriented, and certainly more comfortable. That's the big thing about the X5. Again, it's quiet, it's comfortable, it's fast, it does pretty much everything well, except for the price tag, of course. The next step up from that model is $73,495. That's the plug-in hybrid model. That is a pretty significant jump, but you do get improved performance. And when you actually look at the pricing on that model, you could easily end up in a Grand Cherokee 4xe for relatively the same price. And it's not going to give you that same level of performance. I do like the Grand Cherokee 4xe. The plug-in hybrid system is very, very much the same. They're actually both made by ZF. But we get more power out of the BMW, 483 horsepower. You do sacrifice a little bit of fuel economy versus maybe the Volvo XC90 plug-in hybrid, but I think it's a decent vehicle choice. Also, we don't find too many plug-in hybrids in this segment, especially if you're simply looking for something the format of an X5. You could look at something like a plug-in hybrid XC90, but it's not quite the same thing as the X5. The XC90 is going to be a little bit more family-focused. I think the third row is certainly more practical in it, but the X5 comes across as more luxurious, a little bit sportier, certainly more dynamic as far as its handling capability goes. Now, if you want something more exciting, we have the V8 versions of the X5, of course. The M60i is already an insane level of bonkers. 523 horsepower, all-wheel drive, under 4 seconds 0 to 60 depending on where exactly you are. 22 miles per gallon, that's pretty reasonable for something that is this big and this quick. And I love the interior options we have in the M60i. Yes, it's sort of the entrance to the M family in the X5 lineup, but you still have open pore wood available. You still have comfortable seats that don't have the aggressive shoulder bolstering that we find in the X5M that some people may find a little bit less comfortable. And of course, it's about $30,000, actually about $35,000 less expensive than the M competition. Competition is certainly a bit more limited for the M60i, but clearly there are the AMG versions of the Mercedes-Benz GLE, we have the Porsche Cayenne, and you could see it as an upgrade from, say, something like a previous generation Grand Cherokee Hellcat. Hellcat's no longer offered, neither is the 6.4, but if you want something that's a little bit less powerful, interestingly enough, but more modern, more sophisticated, more luxurious, you could step out of something like that and into an X5 M60i. Of course, if you want the completely bonkers version, that is the M competition version of the X5, starting at $123,295. That is a big, big price tag. But on the other hand, when you take a look at what this kind of vehicle could do, it will absolutely blow your mind. It handles insanely well. It handles just about as well as some generations of M5 practically. And that means that not only is it the pinnacle of the X5 lineup, it's logically direct competition to some of those other ultra-high performance SUVs out there. Think Urus, think certain versions of AMG's lineup, think again of Porsche. But interestingly, it's a much better value than any of those other vehicles out there. And if you're looking at something like a Maserati Levante, I think that the interior is actually better done in the BMW than some of those more premium luxury brands, or I guess I should put that in air quotes, more premium brands, while also giving you generally slightly better reliability, decent handling, better infotainment systems, etc. And that's why the X5 for me is absolutely king of the hill in this two-row segment. If you're looking for a three-row vehicle, a bit more family-focused, something like that, there are other excellent options you should take a look at. Of course, BMW has the X7 in North America as well, and you still can get the tiny third row in the X5 in some versions, but really it's best to think of the X5 as the best two-row luxury SUV in America, as long as you can afford that price tag. And that's why bottom lining it for me, that's really my only complaint, is the price tag gets a little steep if you get carried away with options, but I do think that the lower end trims are actually solid values. So if you are shopping for something like a Lexus RX or a Lexus TX maybe even, and you don't need the third row, you should take a look at something like a BMW X5. It's not going to be quite as reliable as that Lexus, but it is going to be an awful lot more fun. I also think it's going to be an awful lot nicer and easier to live with inside. Be sure and let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section. And of course, stay tuned because hopefully we will be getting our hands on some of the X5M competition coming up soon. Well, that was quite a mouthful, so with that, I will leave you. And be sure and find us in the meantime over at Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all the other social places. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already done so, and check out the related channels. See all of you later.